All right, you guys can grab a seat. So I think the common answer to that question is there's way more than one thing you can hand off, but just one today. It's all we could talk about. But hey, so today what we're doing is we are wrapping up our series called The Minor Leagues. And what we've been doing is through this minor league baseball theme is looking at what the Bible calls the minor prophets in the Bible. And what these are is they're not minor with their impact. They're just minor in the size of the books. But they have major impact with God's story, what God does through them for his people and his ultimate mission to rescue us through Jesus. And just like minor league baseball, they can be a little weird and different and things of that nature. So we're looking at these very weird characters. It's one of the most least taught about and least talked about parts of the Bible, but it's extremely important. And what God was doing through the minor prophets was simple. He was trying to get people's attention back to him, back to how life should be, what it looks like to follow him. And so we've been doing that now for 4 weeks, and we're closing it out this week. And we're doing it by closing out by looking at a guy whose message was extremely similar to all the other minor prophets. But he did it in a way that was a little different. He tweaked it a little differently, and it's important for us to end it with him because I think we need to hear it in our context and our culture today. Because how many of you guys know somebody, maybe it's you or somebody you know, they like to think everybody else is the problem. Like when there's a problem in life, it's never their fault. It's somebody else's problem. It's somebody else's fault. Now, none of us ever like to raise our hands saying, oh yeah, it's me. No one will admit that. But I'm sure all of us know someone where they love to blame everybody else for the problems going on in life. And so we start saying, if my spouse would just be better this way, then our life would be better. If my boss wouldn't be so incompetent, then my job would be better. It's all my boss's fault. It's not my fault. If only my job wasn't so bad, then life would be better. If only those people on the other side of the political spectrum weren't so stupid, then our country would get fixed. And we think that, we hear that, we argue that, and it's always somebody else's problem. If only my church's pastor were better. None of you guys think that, right? No, I'm just kidding. But I know I have a tendency to blame others and not own the responsibility because I don't like to admit that I'm wrong. I don't like to admit that the problems that I'm seeing are actually my fault. In fact, my first inclination when something is wrong or something messed up, I'm trying to think, okay, who else's fault is this? Is this the kid's fault? Is this the dog's fault? Is this Danielle's fault? This can't be my fault right now because we think that way. We do that. We all do that. And it's humbling to say that it's our fault and it's our responsibility to own the problems that we face. I have a full confession to make to you guys. I don't know if you know this. I'm a millennial. And some people may get disgusted by that because, millennials are killing everything. But I'm a millennial. And I love, actually, how much millennials get blamed for everything. In fact, I love it when you just type into Google, millennials are killing the blank, and just look at the list of industries that my generation is killing right now. The golf industry, the doorbell industry, which I didn't know was a big deal anymore, the mayo industry, the diamond industry, the beer industry, all this stuff millennials are killing. And these articles and research of how millennials are the downfall to all these different things. We're killing the napkin industry, the housing industry. We're killing chain restaurants like Applebee's. And I just want to be on record to say right now, if my generation is the cause of the fall of Applebee's, it will be one of the greatest things a generation has done because Applebee's is disgusting. It's awful. If it can go away, I'm cool with that. But we're in charge we're ruining everything. We're ruining all these industries. We're ruining the country. And the downfall of our society is directly tied to my generation. I laugh at that because I think it's kind of funny. I do. I love when I hear millennials are doing this. I'm like, maybe we are. I can't control that, but I don't take it personally. But here's what I see with that. We love to put blame on somebody else because the people who are writing those articles are not millennials, and millennials are writing probably articles of why this generation is killing everything because we like to blame other people, other groups of people, whatever it may be. But what if that's the wrong way to look at things? What if that's the wrong way to look at our society, our culture, our lives? What if we look at the problems and we go, this is our responsibility? How would we change if we took ownership of the problems around us instead of looking to blame somebody else? And it's with that tension we're going to dive into this last week of the Minor League series as we're talking about the minor prophet by the name of Amos. Now, Amos was this dude, he had a big mouth. Like, he ran his mouth, he was blunt, he just did what he had to do. He wasn't afraid to say it like it was, and this was his background. Amos was alive and did his ministry in 8th century BC. And the thing about him is he wasn't like some special religious dude. He was an ordinary guy. He was a shepherd and he was a fig tree farmer. This was his livelihood. That's how he made his living. And God called him to use him to kind of bluntly call out the problems that was going on in the culture around them. He was from a small town near the north and south kingdom borders. Israel was split into 2 kingdoms at this point in their history. And so he was kind of an obscure guy who had no special abilities about him, but God called him to be this prophet. And during his time, Jeroboam was king at this time. We've mentioned Jeroboam like 3 times in this series because this guy was so bad as a king, God sent multiple prophets to get Israel's attention because he was such a bad king. Israel was in such a bad situation when it came to trusting and following God. And this is why, because Jeroboam mainly was this horrible king. He didn't care about God, and because he didn't care about God, Israel really didn't care about God. But the thing they loved about Jeroboam was this: he was a successful military leader, which led to getting new territory, and Israel's enemies were a threat to Israel at this point. So new territory, more peace meant more prosperity for everybody in Israel. More money, more wealth, things were going well because they didn't have to worry about enemies coming and attacking. And people were getting their money, and that's really all that mattered to them. They didn't care about their faith in God. They didn't care about how they were treating people. If they got their money and everything was peaceful, they were happy. So to them, Jeroboam was this great king because of his great military power. But what that led to is it led to apathy about their relationship with God, and it led to lots of idol worship. And so it had this time of peace and prosperity. Israel thinks that everything is going good during this time. And then comes Amos, and he screws everything up. And I mean, he screws everything up with his work. Amos is very blunt in his writings, and there's 9 chapters in the book of Amos that kind of cover his sermons, his poetry, and different visions of what was coming for Israel. And we're going to hit the highlights today. We don't have time to go through all 9 chapters, but I'd recommend it. Go home today, read the 9 chapters of Amos. It's quick, it's easy. Even if there's things you don't fully understand, it's good to just get a complete picture of what Amos's work was all about. And the first thing Amos did in his work and in his writings in the book of Amos that we have in the Bible is he was getting Israel's attention. Chapters 1 and 2 were meant to get Israel's attention on the real problems that was going on around them. And Amos, the way he did this was kind of tricky. His style was different. Remember, he was blunt and honest, and the way he got Israel's attention was kind of unique compared to the other prophets. It starts off, what Amos did was he judged every nation around Israel. So you have Israel in the middle, and there were 7 kingdoms that bordered Israel's kingdom. And so they were enemies of Israel. And what Amos does, he just starts writing these sermons and these things. He's calling out all these different kingdoms, and he tells them, this is what's wrong with you. This is why God's wrath is coming upon you. Like he writes in Amos 1:3, for 3 sins of Damascus, one of the kingdoms around Israel, even for 4, I will not relent. And basically what Amos is writing is God's wrath is coming upon these kingdoms because they don't care about God. They've rebelled against God. They treat people poorly into slavery and all these different things. And it goes on to list the sins of those kingdoms and why God's wrath is coming. And Amos writes the same thing for the rest of the kingdoms, for Gaza, for Tyre, for Edom, for Ammon, for Moab, for Judah. Those are the rest of the 7 kingdoms surrounding Israel. And so things are going good for Israel. Now they hear him writing and they see him preaching that he's declaring that God is going to tear down the surrounding enemies of Israel. And at this point, Israel hears this and they're like, yes, like this is awesome. All of our enemies who we don't like, who we hate, God is going to take them out. We're to become this superpower. We're to be in charge of everything. We're getting our kingdom back. It's going to be bigger and better and badder than ever. It's going to be awesome because God is so angry and frustrated with all the enemies around us. They've screwed up. We're doing good. And this is what Israel's looking for. Israel was always looking for power, earthly power. They wanted their enemies to be gone. They wanted political power, territorial power. And all this sounds and looks very good to Israel as Amos starts this writing in his work. And then Amos turns it on them. Amos 2:6, he says this is what the Lord says, "For 3 sins of Israel, even for 4, I will not relent." And so he does this for the first 7 kingdoms surrounding Israel, and Israel's getting pumped about this. All of a sudden, Amos is like, also Israel. Yeah, God's not going to relent for your sins, and he lists them and he goes through them. And this wasn't what Israel was expecting. Things were going good for them, and all the problems that they associated in their culture weren't their fault. They were thinking, God, take out the enemies. God's supposed to be on their side. They go to temple, they pray, they make the sacrifices. If God was mad at them, why would things be so good? And that's so often what we attribute sometimes with God. When things are good, he's happy with us. When things are bad, he must be mad. And so Israel is going through this good, prosperous season of life. And now God's angry with them, telling them things are going to fall apart and things are broken and they're a mess and God's wrath is going to come upon them. It doesn't make sense to Israel. And that's the problem they missed. The problems going around in that culture, in Israel's culture, and the surrounding kingdom's culture, the problems around them were actually Israel's to own. And now God's wrath was coming for them too because they ignored the problems around them. And here's what Israel's problems were. Here's what the problems going on. The first was this. It was social injustice. The wealthy were ignoring the poor. They allowed the poor to be sold into debt slavery. And basically what that meant is when a poor person owed money to somebody and they struggled to pay it, the person who was owed money to, they could throw the person into slavery basically until they can pay off their debt. But really, they'd be in slavery for a long time because it took them forever to pay off their debt. So now they're selling humans into slavery. And with slavery came sexual abuse, physical abuse. They were thrown into a mess of a situation going on by being sold into slavery. And the wealthy Israelites, the wealthy Jews, they were ignoring this and allowing it to happen, even helping it to happen in lots of ways. They were allowing them to be sold into debt slavery. They were denying them legal representation. A poor person could not afford and didn't have the power to represent themselves in a court situation when they were going to be sold into slavery. And the wealthy would not help them at all. They didn't take care of their neighbors. They didn't take care of the poor. And what's crazy about this is Israel themselves as a nation was in slavery for generations in Egypt. And God rescued them from slavery. And now, instead of remembering what God did to rescue them from slavery and to live and trust God and how to treat people, what Israel's doing now is like, whatever, let's put other people in slavery, even our own people. And so they've completely forgotten what God has done for them and his rescue of them and how God does not approve of slavery and how you treat people. And this is what's going on with social injustice. Also, there was religious hypocrisy going on. See, the Israelites were really, really good at still following the religious rules. They would go to temple, they would do their prayers, they would make their sacrifices, but they didn't really care about it. They did it because it was what they were supposed to do. It was like that religious tradition that a lot of us were kind of raised in. You go to church because you're supposed to go to church. You say your prayers because you're supposed to say your prayers. And all these different things. This is what Israel was doing. Their hearts were extremely apathetic towards God. They'd punch their religious tickets, but it was all for a show. And the religious leaders of that day were the ones setting the course for this. Amos writes in chapter 6, verse 1, "Woe to you who are complacent in Zion and to you who feel secure in Mount Samaria, you notable men of the foremost nation to whom the people of Israel come." Amos calls Israel, you're the greatest nation because God has called you out. He's chosen you to be a light in this world. And you leaders, you religious leaders, you don't care about God. And your apathy towards God is overflowing to the people of Israel too. And they don't care about God either. You're complacent and you don't care. And people are coming to you looking to trust and follow God. And this is how you do it. The people of Israel need their leaders to set the example, and the leaders didn't really care. And this led Israel to go away from God, to treat others poorly, to chase after other gods and false idols. And our relationship with God is always connected to how we treat people. So you see how the religious hypocrisy led into how the social injustices ran rampant and how they treated people, sold them to slaves, because they were so disconnected from their relationship with God. But ultimately, the main fault that Israel had that was the base of all this was their idolatry. And this is always at the root of Israel's failing. It's the root of all people's failing when it comes to us not following God. It's always idol worship. That we put something in place of where God should be. We elevate something in life and make that something more important than it should be. And so for Israel, what they did is they went, and there was in those surrounding kingdoms that I mentioned, they believed in all these different types of gods. And they were gods that did certain things for specific purposes. And Israel is all about following and worshiping three main gods that Amos calls out. One was a sex and fertility god, because that was status in that culture. If you can't have children, as a woman, you had no place in life. Basically, that's what they were taught, and that was the lie that was told. And so they worshiped these sex and fertility gods because they realized that was their status. They worshiped the god of war because they wanted to take more territory and then have no enemies take over them. And so they sought favor from these gods of war. And they also worshiped the god of wealth, because if you had money, you didn't have to worry about things in that culture. If you were poor, there was lots of problems. And so they worshiped these three different gods, offered sacrifices, gave their love and adoration to those gods, thinking that status and that security is what they really needed in life. And they worshiped those instead of God. That led to injustice, that led to religious hypocrisy, and they were focused on themselves. These were Israel's main faults in the time of Amos. And why was this such a problem, though? Why was Israel's problems more of a letdown to God than even the surrounding kingdoms? Because it's probably a surprise after Amos writes all these 7 kingdoms are going down, and then Israel's also going to go down. Why is Israel's sins even worse than the other people's? And the reason for this is Israel was a chosen people. They were chosen to be a light in the darkness. Amos 3:2 says, "You only have I chosen of all the families of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your sins." Israel was God's chosen people to show the world who God was, and that ultimately through Israel they would bring Jesus Christ to this world through that lineage. God chose them to use them to bring hope to this world. They weren't chosen to be the one and only people. Israel was chosen to be the first of many people to know and follow and trust God. And now they fall in line with the other kingdoms, other cultures around them, leading them away from God. Israel was supposed to be different. Israel was supposed to be special. Israel was supposed to be this people that when other countries and other cultures looked at them, they go, what's different about them? And the answer to that question was they had the one true God. But often Israel will go, you know what, no, I'm going to go my own way. I'm going to follow these other cultures because I like what they're doing. It seems better, seems safer, seems more secure. Let's go that direction. And so instead of being a light in the darkness, Israel just became like the darkness. And the problem with this is why God was so frustrated, so angry with Israel, is with great calling comes great responsibility, and Israel just screwed that up. When we trust God, we follow God, we're called to a responsibility to show others who God is. And when we choose to follow different paths, chase different idols, chase different hypocrisies, and all those different things, we don't show people who God is. And this is what Israel was doing. And so God uses Amos to call them out for their problems. It wasn't the other kingdom's fault, which Israel thought that was the case. Just because things were going well for them on earthly standards, like wealth and peace going on, they were still a mess, and Israel took no ownership of it. They blamed other people. They didn't think they were at fault. And Amos starts addressing this harshly. Like, he's blunt, like stuff that it makes me kind of like laugh and go, ooh, if I was Israel, that would be uncomfortable. So to injustice, this is what Amos said. Amos 4:1, "Listen to me, you fat cows living in Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, who always call on your husbands, bring us another drink." Yeah, Amos called the women of Israel fat cows. I'm not like condoning that or anything like that. I'm not like, saying that's a good thing, but Amos is a dude who was blunt, and here's why he called them fat cows. In that culture, your wealth with usually the livestock that you had, if you had fatter, bigger cows, it meant you were wealthy because you had money to feed them, and cows could just roam around and eat, and they got bigger. And the wealthier you were, the less work you had to put in with life. You could just sit around, chill out, drink alcohol, whatever you want to do. And this is what a lot of the wealthy people were doing in that culture. And in this case, he's calling up the women because they were just sitting around, getting drunk, probably eating a lot of food, just kind of chilling while there was poor people oppressed around them. They did nothing about it. So Amos says, hey, listen, fat cows, this is what you're doing. Now, if I'm a person in that culture and I hear that being said, hopefully it gets my attention. And so Amos calls them out for their injustice, for how they treat the poor, how they're not being a light, how they're not taking care of their neighbor. To the religious hypocrisy in the culture, Amos said this, chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. I hate all your show and pretense, the hypocrisy of your religious festivals and solemn assemblies. And this is speaking for God here. I will not accept your burnt offerings and grain offerings. I won't even notice all your choice peace offerings. Away with your noisy hymns of praise. I will not listen to the music of your harps. Instead, I want to see a mighty flood of justice and an endless river of righteous living. And so Amos is speaking for God. He says, hey, Israel, all this religious stuff that you do, yeah, I hate that. I hate the temple worship. I hate the sacrifices. I hate the music that you play. I hate the hymns that you're doing. So basically he was saying, hey, churches, I hate when you gather on Sunday mornings when you don't treat people with dignity outside the building. I hate that you're so focused on looking good on the outside that on the inside you're dark and ugly and you're all about just putting the show out there and making yourself look good, all the while you hate people, you treat people poorly, you hurt the poor, you don't help the poor. I hate all that. And what that shows is everything that we do with our religious practice, our gathering on a Sunday morning, when Aaron leads us in worship of song and things like that, all that stuff is junk if our hearts actually don't follow Jesus. It's a waste of our time, and God hates it. But so often we fall into that religious hypocrisy. And God tells Israel through Amos that he's sick of them playing the religious part and ignoring the problems around them. People are poor, they're broken and enslaved, but as long as Israel does the religious activities, they think they're fine. And God says, no more. And what he wants is he wants justice and he wants righteousness. And what those words mean in the Hebrew language is justice is pretty simple. It means actions taken to correct the injustice. So what that means, when there's injustice going on, we see it. It's one of those things like, how do you define it? You know it when you see it. When there's something broken, something messed up, people are mistreated and people are poor and broken, and we do nothing to help that. We're not practicing justice. And God says, no, I want justice. And he wants righteousness. And the righteousness, the word that he uses here is about relationships, that he wants right relationships with all people despite social differences. So he's calling on the wealthy in the situation, saying, hey, the way you treat the poor, there's no righteousness there. You want to follow me? You want me to be close to you like you think you are right now because you do all the religious activity? You're going to get closer to me when you practice justice and when you practice righteousness. When you correct the wrongs, when you own the problems, and when you have correct relationships with all people around you, no matter your differences, especially your social differences. And Amos is just hammering Israel with this stuff. And then to the idolatry, he says this, Amos 5:14, seek good, not evil, that you may live. Then the Lord God Almighty will be with you just as you say he is. You see, all this time Israel thinks God's with us, we're wealthy, we're prosperous, we're peaceful. God must be blessing us for all of the great things that we're doing. And then God says to Amos, you want me to be close to you? Don't chase after idols. Don't put other things above me. You want life to operate correctly? I go first. Everything flows through that, and that's how life will operate best because I designed it that way. If you want me to be with you like you think I am, then come back to me, God says to Israel. Don't chase the evil of idolatry, but seek the good of following God. And they were so worried about their status and security in that culture, they didn't even realize how far away from God that they actually were. And so this is what Amos does. And then he tells them what God's going to do. He tells them that God's going to send Assyria to completely take them over. The peace and prosperity was going away. And the reason for this is God was showing them he doesn't value peace and prosperity. That's not what he's saying. That's not the evidence of things going well. He's not saying life is good with him as long as life is going well for you. What he's saying is, I don't value that. I value justice. I value righteousness. That Israel had all these problems that they didn't own. So God sent Amos to remind them, this is your problem too. And I've chosen you to do something about it. So go do it. And Amos is blunt and honest about this because Israel needed to hear why they were so far from God. They had their own problems around them that they had to own. Their treatment of people reflected their heart from God. That their heart was fake and not loving. It was selfish and actually full of hate for other people. So why would we end the series on this though? Like we hear this blunt story of Amos and the work that he does. Why would we purposely end the series like this? Because I think we need to hear from this shepherd fig tree farmer turned prophet. Because oftentimes we can ignore the problems around us and assume we're just okay. You see, Amos just isn't this letter, this book of the Bible to Israel 3,000 years ago. It's a reminder for us today, too, that we have to learn from Israel's hypocrisy, that social injustice goes against who God is, that religious hypocrisy goes against who God is, and idolatry goes against who God is. And we can be guilty of all three of these. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you did something to help those in need? Or how often does religion become a checklist and not something you authentically pursue to trust and follow God? And if you're honest, what has become an idol in your life? And it could be something that's good at its core, but things like family, work, relationship, money, and hobbies, we can elevate these things in our lives to be higher than God. And when we do that, we turn them into idols. That we worship those things, we adore those things more than we worship God. And we're all guilty of this, but it's so easy to blame other people for these problems. Like, for instance, how many times have you said, I know I've thought it and dealt with this before, you see someone kind of begging on the side of the road. And your first thought was, well, yeah, he looks poor, she looks poor, but what did they do to get themselves in that situation? Like, seriously, did they just get drunk all the time? Did they make bad decisions? Like, what did they do? And we automatically put the blame on them for being in that situation without knowing the story. Even though we have an opportunity to help, this is what we do. Or we say things like, I'd like to pursue my relationship with God more. I love God, but you know what? I'm busy. Life gets in the way. And so I'll do my checklist thing, but I'm not really pursuing God in every aspect of my life. I just don't have time for that. And honestly, I don't care about that. Where's that religious hypocrisy and overflowing? And then we say things like with the idols in our life. We don't like to admit that we have idols. We don't like to admit that we make things that we worship that are like basically little mini gods in our life. But we say things like, I love God, but these things make me happy. And wouldn't God want me to be happy in life? And so we chase things and we do things that elevate those things above God. And we make excuses of why this is okay. We don't ever own the problems, and it leads us away from God and others. And this sounds harsh, but I think we all need to hear this because it gets our attention, and hopefully it helps us get going in the right direction. Because I want to ask you this question. How would you rate your relationship with God right now? Like if we had a scale of 0 to 10 on the screen, I think we have that here. So we have this scale. I want you to start mentally thinking right now, where are you on this scale when it comes to your relationship with God? 0 means it doesn't exist. Like you're here because someone dragged you here. You don't think God exists. If he does, you want nothing to do with him. You're a 0. A 10 is that every aspect of your life you've trusted God with, you're following God with, things are going well. You have this very intimate relationship with God. That's what 10 is. I'm guessing all of us fall somewhere in between there, but where are you on that scale? Wherever you are, do you know who chooses that number? Who puts you there? It's not God. It's not your life circumstances. It's you. You put yourself on this scale. So what are you doing right now, wherever you are on this, however you would rate your relationship with God, how it's going and how you're pursuing him and how you're exploring major questions in life about God, wherever you're at, what are you doing to move right down the scale? What are you doing to grow to love God better with everything you have in life? What are you doing to show more love to your neighbor as God calls you to? And what are you doing to not make excuses of why you can't do that, but actually own this problem and grow? Because these are problems we have to own. Some of you and some of us, that we've drifted away from God, or we've never really even had a relationship with God to begin with. And that's a problem that you need to own. And there are people that we all know that are far from God. They don't believe or they struggle to believe in God. And we can make excuses for them of why we don't reach out about that, why we don't talk to them about it, why we don't invite them to church and join us in this exploration of who God is. We can make excuses all day. But it's a problem that we have to own. And there are people who are broken and poor around us in our community. In Chartiers Valley alone, we have extremely wealthy people, millionaires, billionaires. I don't think anyone's sitting in this room. That'd be cool if you were. And we have extremely poor people in our community. 40% of our school districts on free or reduced lunches. The debt that people go into just in the school district that I know about because they can't pay for their kids' lunches is astronomical. We have people in our community. What are we doing to help them? That's a problem as followers of Jesus we need to own. And you're part of a church here with one church, or maybe you're exploring this church. I don't want to just assume that wants to help you grow together and meet the needs of this community. But we are part of a church, to be honest, guys, we have needs ourselves. Needs to keep growing in our ministry, needs to keep functioning as a church. In those different situations, what are you doing to own those things too? And you have neighbors that don't know God, you may rarely talk to. What are you doing to own that as well? All these are problems that God has called us to be a part of helping. And with great calling comes great responsibility. And all these things can help us move right on that scale. But some of the question I think we have when we start thinking about this thing is, where do I start? Because there's lots of problems around us. There's lots of stress going on in life. I'm not going to sit here and say, just to brush away all the stresses you're dealing with in life, because the truth is, those are real situations. Money, jobs, kids, marriages, all those things can cause a lot of tension in life. And so we're like, well, how do I do all this stuff to help other problems? What do we do? Where do you even start? Well, it reminds me of a story that I was told once about Mother Teresa. And a lot of us have heard of this woman because she's literally one of the greatest people to walk this planet. But she's this nun who gave her life to serve the poorest of the poor. And she served in places like Haiti, which is extremely poor, Calcutta, India, which is some of the most broken places in this world. And people would want to know what's up with Mother Teresa because she would do all these things and start orphanages and change people's lives. And it was amazing and crazy and what she did. So people would seek her out and see, what are you doing, Mother Teresa? And they would get to these places like in India and Haiti, and they would look around and go, this is a mess. Like sometimes here in America, we can like only see poor people like when they're panhandling on the side of a road and things like that. When you go to places like India and Haiti and things like that, there's no hiding it. Like poverty, extreme poverty is everywhere. And so these people get there and they see Mother Teresa and the work she's doing, and they see that what she's doing is making a difference, but it's not changing the culture. And they would go to her like, Mother Teresa, one person said to her, it feels like what you're doing is just like a drop of water in the bucket. And Mother Teresa kind of snarkily replied, no, it's like a drop in the ocean. And they go, why do you do it then? And she goes, if we didn't do this, that'd be one less drop in the ocean. And they ask, okay, then what do you do? How do you do it? How do I even start doing this? And she simply tells this person, just do what is in front of you. And this is what she was so good at. She owned the problems around her that were right in front of her. When she saw brokenness, she saw poverty, she saw hurt, she took a step to own that problem, to help with it. She did what was in front of her. So if you want to move right on the scale of how you trust God and love people, do what's in front of you. Because here's the thing, and this is the one thing. God has given you every opportunity to love him and love others. Right now. You're not missing opportunity to trust God more. You're not missing opportunity to love other people better. You have every opportunity right now in your life. You have all the resources, all the relationships, all the opportunity to love God and love people better. Own it. It's right in front of you. And so what are you going to do to move right? To own what's in front of you. Maybe for some of you, it's actually putting your faith in God. Maybe for some of you, you've wrestled with this idea of God. You've explored this idea of God. You don't even know what to believe about this guy and this Jesus guy and all these different things. But maybe it's time to say, you know what? I trust. You see, God doesn't call you to be perfect. But he calls you to accept your need for a Savior, and that's through Jesus. And maybe it's time to take that step to proclaim that faith in Jesus. And we practice that. We show that through baptism here. And we've done that before. We do it at the horse trough. It's a good old time with portable churches like that. But if that's a step that you need to take, talk to me or talk to one of our leaders before you leave here today. Maybe it's time to take a step right by just getting yourself on the scale. Or maybe another way to take a step right is to pursue your relationship with God with others. Because here's the truth. You cannot follow God by yourself. We're not wired that way. We're not created that way. We're called to follow God in community. But so often we just kind of disassociate that and say, no, I got this on my own. I'll do it myself. But the way we grow best is we grow together. And we try to encourage that here at One Church by doing what we call small groups. And it's the fall season kicking off. That means small groups are kicking off too here later this month and into early October. And what small groups are, it's a chance for people to get together. We hang out, we eat food together, we hang out together, we study scripture together, we pray together, we just do life together. And we have multiple groups that meet at different times of the week, and it's a great chance to jump into a group. And if you're interested in that and exploring what small groups look like more, I encourage you to fill out a Connect card before you leave in the lobby. Just fill it out. We'll get you more information about those groups and get you the details of when they start, where they're at, all those different things, because this is where we grow. That's a way we take a step right. Maybe the way you take a step right is getting out of your comfort zone to invite someone who's far from God with no church connection to come with you to church. Maybe this is a step you got to take. And next Sunday is a great opportunity to do that with that one Sunday. It's designed to help people who are far from God, far from church, this idea to say, hey, you can come here in a safe place where people are nice and there's donuts and there's coffee and there's good things for kids to do and things like that. But it's a chance for you to invite them into that. Or maybe you need to do something to be more a part of this church, like join a serving team. This stuff doesn't happen on accident. The curtains, the children's ministry, the hospitality, the assimilation, the worship stuff, this takes a team of people to do that, and we're always needing and looking for more people to jump on board. And we have different areas you can be a part of, and if that's something you're interested to move right, to trust God, to love people, to pursue your faith more, we could use you. If you're interested in that, again, lobby, Connect card before you leave. We'll get you more connected with this stuff. Or something else. Even something we don't like talking about, that's even how we handle the resources God's given us. Some of the best ways we trust God and love people is how we handle our finances. So maybe that's something you need to think through. How are you financially blessing others and giving glory to God by the way you use your finances? You see, here's the deal. We're moving into this fall season of life. And what happens in the fall, this happens in church, in life, in everything. Fall's like a restart season. Summer's insane, crazy schedules, traveling, all that different stuff. And then fall gets here, it's like, okay, schedules can get a little more relaxed right now. Everything's centered around the football season now, every Sunday where we're focused on that. It's just more of a very almost planned out, more black and white type of a schedule. And what we try to do is we kind of get calibrated on that. With schedules in church, and we choose this season to kind of get in a better rhythm. And so here's what I'm challenging you guys. Make this a season to move right, to move closer to loving God, closer to loving people, and this will change us and others. No excuses, no hypocrisy, because this is what it means to do what's in front of you, because you've been given everything you need to grow, to love God and love people. And this is what Amos was getting at. That there was problems around Israel they needed to focus on them. They couldn't just brush them off. He was blunt, and he was moved to confront evil and the brokenness in that culture, but ultimately what God was doing through Amos was saying there's hope. That he wasn't just calling Israel to move closer to God, but God was moving closer to Israel. And this is what Amos starts ending his letter with in Amos 9:11-12. He says, in that day I will restore David's fallen shelter, and I will repair its broken walls and restore its ruins, and will rebuild it as it used to be, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that bear my name, declares the Lord, who will do these things. You see, more than anything, Israel wanted their kingdom back. They wanted their earthly kingdom with the physical king on a throne controlling everybody else. But God says that's not the plan. The plan is bigger than that. It's not just for you, Israel. It's for everybody, and that plan is Jesus. I don't want just people moving closer to me. I'm moving closer to them ultimately through this rescue through my son. You see, God in his calling out of hypocrisy sent the solution to all the problems through Jesus Christ. And that's what we need to cling to, and that's what we need to remember today, that God's given us everything we need to love him and love others. That's ultimately through Jesus. See, he wasn't just saying Israel was the chosen nation and only is going to happen for them. He said that they had remnant of Edom and all the nations that bear my name, and it's all people. See, God isn't just for one people or one ethnicity or one thing like that. He's for all people. And he moved closer to them through Christ. As a church, that's what we cling to. As a church, that's what's been given to us, to grow closer to him and love other people. So do that because it's in front of you. And let's make this season, this fall season of One Church and as our lives, a season that we move closer to God and the people. Let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for this time together to explore more of who you are in this minor league series that we're wrapping up. But God, help us to own these problems around us. That it's not just other people's problems, God. You've called us to be a light, to own these problems, to grow closer to trusting you and loving people, God, and help us to take steps to do that. Help us to watch out for the injustice, the righteousness that we could be living out, God. Make sure we don't fall into religious hypocrisy and idol worship through different things, God, but we trust you through everything because you came close to us through Jesus. And it's your name we pray.